And as so, and as a maybe further information, I just would like to let you know that we really would like this event to be as interactive as possible. So we really encourage you to use the chat, but not only to raise your hands with the options that Zoom offer, or write that you want to speak. We will give you the floor. There are also some opportunities to do so. We thought of giving to foster a bit the interactivity via Mentimeter, which I hope you don't mind to use. So if you can go to the next slide, you will see the presentation on Mentimeter. And there is a small icebreaker that we would like you to do now, just to enter into the tool and to try it out. So you should go to menti.com and then use the code 28442655, and there you will have the question, how do you feel today? There are some options already there, so I hope you don't mind to choose among multiple choice. But yes, we thought that would be the easiest way to start with. So maybe my colleague Ola can, I will write down the, yes, so you are, I hope you are all in. If not, you have the code on the top of your screen. I also write it in the chat. Ah, yes, perfect. My colleague already did it. Okay, there is quite few people that are ready and eager to learn. Some are a bit quiet and dreaming. I think we had a long day. I mean, many of you were with us yesterday, so we had a very long day with the General Assembly. So I haven't put tired, but you're also allowed to be. My colleagues and I are a bit, so we hope this won't be reflected in our event. Okay, so this is how it works. There will be more questions. Some of them are really to get to know how you feel about the presentations or the project focus. But what I would like to do now is to maybe stop here and give the floor to Gina, the Secretary General of EAEA, for a welcome speech. So Gina, the floor is yours.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, Francesca, and welcome. As she said, my name is Gina from the EAEA, and I think I know most of you, but welcome to this conference on one of our key pieces of work, FutureLab. I will talk a bit more about the work of the project in a bit, but I would like to give you a bit of a context of why we got involved and how we want to take that further. Most of you, well, most of you work in adult education, so you clearly know that one area of adult education is the one that we're most in the public view, in the view of politicians, that we're most connected with, and that is basic skills training, second chance, and so on. This is, of course, a very important part of adult education, but in a way, and I'm using a term that's being that our president Uwe has used in the past, and I have stolen it from him. It's the repair shop approach. So there's something that has gone wrong in the school system. There's something that has gone wrong in the learning pathway and so on. And hopefully people will then come into adult education and we will make up for that lack of skills, competencies, and so on. The other option is also, for example, there's an introduction of new technology, you know, digital skills, and there are plenty of people who haven't yet caught up, and adult education comes in and compensates for that. Now, this means that we have a certain role in society that always reacts to developments and reacts to the lack of skills, competencies. But in a way, we do see ourselves as much more than that. And it's sometimes more difficult to present that side to policymakers, the general public, and so on. And that is to be more active, be more proactive, if we want to use that term, but also to be stronger in shaping our lives, our economies, our Europe, and where we really want to have an impact. And so that thought, I think, has been going around. And I mean, basically transformative learning and adult education, as yesterday a few people pointed out, this goes back to Freire, this goes back to a tradition of adult education. And I think it's the perfect time to go back to that and to renew it. And before we started the project, people like Jere Manninen had already started working on that. And we then joined forces and said, you know, there is adult education that can work differently, that is not only reacting, but that is actually, you know, planning change and going towards change, which is trying to do things differently than the usual reaction, and shapes our lives and so on. So that is the rationale behind it. And I'm happy to say that this approach to adult education, and not only adult education, I think is gaining momentum, and Fergal probably will tell us more about that. It's gaining momentum, and we are being joined by more and more colleagues. And I think we were really well placed with the FutureLab project to start working on that already some years ago. And we're very happy to be able to share that work with everyone. And I can already say on behalf of the EAEA, but I assume also the project consortium, that we're planning to take that further, to think how that learning to change, that transformation of learning, that change orientation, how we can take that further and not only fulfill that task, which, let me make that clear, we still take very seriously, and which is really important to compensate for a lack of skills and competencies, but that we want to reinforce also that part that reinforces change. Now, I want to quickly give you a bit of an overview for those of you who were not directly involved in the project, what we have been doing. I need to quickly check with my colleagues. Should I share the screen, Francesca, or will you have it, the overview of the project activities?
No, you can share the screen if you have it there.
Okay, good. I need to apologize. We are a bit flustered here because we were all sitting, well, the EAEA group was sitting downstairs in the meeting room, but we have construction work going on next door, and they're currently doing all kinds of drilling and works that you're actually vibrating, and even with headphones you hear nothing. So we had to move. So I'm currently looking for, okay, share screen. Here we go. Does it work? Do you see this?
Gina. It's perfect.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I don't want to go into the details, but I think it's very appropriate and to give a huge credit to the project consortium to actually have done all that. So we started in January 2019. There were a number of meetings that brought the consortium together. Let me also point out that a big thank you goes to our colleagues in France, who are the coordinators / beneficiaries of the project. And I also have to thank and want to thank the French agency for approving the project, because it's not one of the usual Erasmus Plus KE2, and France approved the project with great serenity. So a big thank you. We did a repository of good practices and analysis. We had a multiplier event in Helsinki. We had decided in the project that we wouldn't concentrate on change orientation just like that, but to concentrate on two main topics that are key in the development of Europe at the moment. One is digitalization and the other one democracy. So how can adult education in a change-oriented way work with those two topics? And we had first an online course on change-oriented adult education and digitalization, and then in autumn 2020 on democracy. And we're very happy to say that we had more than 150 learners for the two courses, and you can still find the webinars and the sessions either on the whole course on our website, EAEA -learning.eu, but also on our website. We had a regional online event. I mean, original things were planned to take place in person, but so we had a regional online event in February this year. I'm getting confused. I'm horrible. So by our colleagues in Slovakia, EIVD, and then we had an online workshop on democracy in March, and about 80 participants in each event. We are currently working on guidelines and recommendations. The final conference is right now, and we are still going to have a regional event in Portugal by EPA TV. And then in August, we're going to launch the guidelines for trainers and the policy recommendations. Now, you can see it's been a mixture of thematic events and regional events. That was a very deliberate choice, because in the past we have been trying to strengthen work on the regional level. So we've had events in Portugal and Slovakia to strengthen the regions that these organizations are working with. And I can say that there has been a huge interest from adult education and adult educators to be involved. So I hope you will all find the results and the discussions very interesting. We certainly do, and we're very happy and we're very grateful to everyone who's been involved. So I'll shut up now and I'll come back at a later stage. And thank you so much. And all the best for the discussions. I wish you a very interesting day.
Thank you so much, Gina. I also shared the link of the project website in the chat. So if you want to learn more, feel free to click on that. Not now though, because we have the honor to have Dr. Fergal Finnegan with us. We are already a bit late, but it was good to have those 5 minutes more, because at the moment we are 60 participants, and then probably it will increase even more in the next minutes. I just would like to remind you that for those that joined with the link that was sent on Monday, to check your name, because it might be wrong. We had a major technical issue, and the people that were there yesterday know it already. So please have a look at your video or screen, and then use the rename option that you can see when you put the mouse on your screen, and then see that 3 dots, so rename option. Okay, so it's my pleasure then to give the floor to Fergal Finnegan, who is a lecturer at the Department of Adult and Community Education at the University of Maynooth, Ireland. Dr. Finnegan is an active member of the European Society Research of Education of Adults, that you probably know as REA, and currently a co-convener of the Network on Active Democratic Citizenship and Adult Learning. He's one of the editors of the journals of Transformative Education, and also the European Journal for Research on Education and Learning of Adults, the RELA, I think it was the acronym. So thanks a lot, Dr. Finnegan, for joining us, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Francesca, and thanks also to Sari. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today. It's a real pleasure. I think what EAEA does is very important. It's actually necessary. I think we need energetic and sustained advocacy for adult education. So I'm delighted to be with colleagues from EAEA, and I'm particularly interested in what FutureLab has been doing. It's probably my main research interest is emancipatory adult education. So what FutureLab is doing and looking at is of real interest, and I've read the documentation and looked at the materials on the website, and I'm really looking forward to the morning. I guess that type of proximity, the sort of shared interest, means that it's probably unlikely I'm going to say something to the people involved in FutureLab that they don't know already. The best I think I can hope for is to try and affirm some important ideas and values, and maybe to open up a couple of questions. And I think I'm going to come at the issues raised by FutureLab from a slightly different angle. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the social context. I'm going to talk about democracy, and in particular, I'm going to talk about what I perceive as a crisis in democracy, and why that is. That's in the background of a lot of the FutureLab documentation, but I'm going to foreground it for a reason. And then I'm going to talk about how adult education can respond to that democratic crisis. I'm going to sort of offer 5 coordinates for response. That will be fairly general. We will hopefully that will feed into discussions about policy and practice later. One thing I should say, whilst I'm fairly comfortable talking about democracy and adult education, actually I'm happy doing it, I don't know a great deal about digitalization. I've only done tiny bits of work on that, so I will say relatively little about that, and that will be at the end, and it will be a bit more tentative, but I hope that's okay. So I'm very much looking forward to chatting to you, but for the time being, I'm going to get on with what I want to say. So the first thing I want to bring to the meeting is that I think we are in a fairly difficult situation, in some sense anxiety producing. It's been a very intense decade, not just an intense year. And I think a lot of us are registering those sort of disturbances in various ways. And I think, as Marco Rovelli, the Italian scholar, has said, I think democracy is in a deep crisis, and probably deeper than we're often willing to admit. And I suppose that idea of democracy in crisis has been around for a while. 10, 15 years ago, people were sort of noting a lack of participation in mass parties, people not being particularly motivated to participate in elections and so forth. And I suppose that's you can still see that occasionally if you look at the participation rates in voting in France this week in the local election. There's still a sort of a sense that these institutions don't really respond, so why participate, amongst other people. I think since the economic crisis and the sort of long rippling of effects from that, we've seen the growth of various forms of populism, nativism, xenophobic movements, even neo-fascist movements. And I think that's sharpened people's concern, I think for good reason. That I think what's happening in Europe and beyond should concern us as citizens, as adult educators. Now, Marco Rovelli says, and again, I think this is a useful point, that it's not simply a democratic crisis. Underlying this are like seismic shifts and events, a social crisis, if you wish. So the democratic crisis is not, populism is not the cause, it's a symptom. And I think we need to be very careful to dig down into what might lie behind this particular moment, this sense of a crisis, in order to renew it, because that's where I'm going to go with this. And I think that there is an opportunity in crisis to think anew, to thicken out, to actually go from democratic institutions to hopefully towards a democratic way of life. But in order to do that, I think we have to have a fairly sober and clear assessment of why it's happened in the first place. So in my opinion, the social crisis that we face in Europe and beyond has, can be largely ascribed, not solely, but largely ascribed to the impacts of neoliberal capitalism. And I think this is really, really, 20 years ago, you could say, well, maybe it's having some of an effect, but the effects are very, very visible now to us. And I would see them as three interrelated, very, very significant impacts. The first is the intensification of inequality and wealth. The second is increasing disparity in influence and power. And the third is a type of crisis of democratic agency and even meaning. Okay. But if you bear with me, I'm going to talk through those various points, and because how we frame this, I think, does affect how we might respond. Okay, the first, inequality in income and wealth. As you no doubt know already, there's quite a lot of international organizations, academic researchers who have been looking at inequality in income and, more importantly, wealth. And they discern a general trend which should concern us, and that is that the very, very wealthy are becoming increasingly wealthy, and a lot of people have been left behind. And this isn't simply Oxfam saying it's people like Thomas Piketty, it's Credit Suisse who do a wealth report every year. And I mean, there's various ways of framing that and slicing it and dicing it, and the inequalities between and within countries and globally and regionally is all very complex. But the trend is that the richest, the super rich, are getting much richer. 1% of the world's population hold 48% of the wealth. That's quite extraordinary. And it's the direction it's going in that's important. And the interesting thing is that neither the financial crisis nor the pandemic, it can slow it down, it can halt it, but it seems like those effects are continuing. And why should we care? Well, I think if it goes unabated, as Thomas Piketty says, we will eventually end up with 19th century levels of inequality. And inequality I think, as Wilkinson and Pickett have pointed out, is bad for people. It creates unhealthy societies. It damages human beings. But I think for our discussion today, the point I really want to emphasize is that without a minimal commitment to democracy as we understand it doesn't particularly work. So, and I think a lot of the social crisis that we're in is due to this. Alongside that, wealth is a type of power, of course, and it is linked to political influence and political power. But I think it's important to hold a focus on how things are being influenced in various ways, which goes beyond that. And some of this it's sort of fallen out of favor a little bit, but what we've seen over the past 30 years has been an extraordinary rise in the influence of transnational corporations. Of the 100 largest economic entities in the world, last time I checked, which is a couple of years ago, only 31 of them were countries. The rest were TNCs. And that, along with changes in transport technology, in regulatory regimes, means that there's much greater mobility of capital across the world. And that, alongside the expansion of the global workforce and the weakening of collective institutions such as trade unions. If you look at the numbers involved in trade unions in Europe, there's been a precipitous decline in union density. I think that's really shifted the balance of power in quite worrying ways. And I think democracy, as we understood post-war, was depended on those sort of countervailing forces. And there's other things going on. I think these sort of deep social logics, which aren't fully accountable, are things we should be very concerned about as Democrats. But there's other things which are linked to this, such as financialization, which is the spread of financial instruments, not just in the financial sector, but into non-financial firms and even into households, which means that there's all sorts of processes that are not fully democratically accountable. And, you know, I come from Ireland, which was one of the peripheral nations which got very badly hit in the financial crisis. So that it's become of keen interest to me. And I think we really do have to take that inequality in power very, very seriously. The third point I wanted to make in terms of the source of the social crisis is that I think there's been, in a number of ways, a sense that institutions can't or won't respond to popular will. I mean, you could go back 20 years and talk about the response to the very large anti-war movement, you know, which there wasn't an effective response. There's been things like that repeatedly, and I think most dramatically and most importantly, and as a father, something I'm deeply concerned about, is the response to the climate crisis. I mean, you know, we've spent over the pandemic, or just before the pandemic, we're seeing forest fires in Brazil, we're seeing forest fires in California and Australia. You know, we're beginning to see whole, you know, migration across parts of Africa as people, we get increased food scarcity. This is very serious stuff, and it seems like either we can't or we won't take the necessary initiatives. And I think that all this, along with the inequalities in wealth and power, lodges somewhere. It has an impact on how we think about ourselves, and that and this is definitely something I've come across in my own empirical research, an increasing sense of precarity. People coming from communities or even societies where they feel like the best was in the past, that their life worlds are no longer stable. There's an increasing complexity of culture, which is hard to handle. I think that can be very, very destabilizing. It doesn't have to be negative, but it can be very destabilizing. But I think with those deeper inequalities in the background, it has fed a sense of futurelessness. I think that's enormously worrying. And the American political philosopher, she's a feminist, her last book, Wendy Brown, wrote a really interesting book called In the Ruins of Neoliberalism. And she said what she discerns, and her primary reference point is American culture and society. What she discerns in recent years is a type of nihilism, a type of attitude which says there's no values which hold us all together. And any attempt to think about the common good is either pointless or stupid, that people even are indifferent to suffering or even celebrating it. And she says that there's a strain. It's not the majority of people by any means. There's a strain of a sort of festive, apocalyptic sort of approach to our shared life. And as I said, I don't think that's by any means the majority of people, but you only have to spend a little bit of time on social media in any place to come across that. And I think that crisis that I'm talking about is linked to inequality in wealth, inequality in power, and that crisis in agency and meaning. And I think those are the parameters by which we should be orientating ourselves as adult education. And I don't think we should be underestimating the significance of this by any means. So how might we respond? Well, I want to offer 5 thinking points, if you want, 5 departure points for our discussion, and they're necessarily broad. I think we can hopefully get into what it means for policy and practice a little bit later. And the first is, despite the fact that this is quite a severe crisis to my mind, with deep roots, I do think we shouldn't get involved in simply conjuring up dismal futures. That I think that happens very often in social science. I don't think that's useful, and I don't think it's fully truthful. I think there's things that happened in the past and are happening now that we can look towards and say, actually, there's resources for hope. There's reasons why we should, as citizens, as adult educators, feel emboldened, feel capable in meeting these challenges. In fact, see this as a moment in which we can renew certain things, react, and be proactive, as Jeannie was saying. And when I think, and this does come across in the FutureLab document, actually, very clearly, if you look at adult education's past, and it's not the whole of adult education by any means, but I think it's a very important part of it, is like if you cast your eye over adult education over a century and a half, what you see is this extraordinary effort to democratize education as part of what Raymond Williams, the British adult educator and cultural theorist, said, as part of a long revolution. And it's important to remember in times of democratic crisis that there was a long revolution. And what he meant by that was that slowly, surely, incrementally, somewhat unevenly, ordinary people exercised enough power that society changed in really fundamental ways towards democracy. And I think if you think about our very rich tradition in adult education, I see in the documents Yuri and his colleagues have written up, Edward Lindemann spoken about. I see Paulo Freire mentioned. I see bell hooks mentioned. I see Jacques Mezereau mentioned. We can talk about citizenship schools, the civil rights movement, and things like that. All of that I see as part of that long revolution. And adult education helped lead that. And that's the extraordinary thing in terms of the various sectors and parts of the education system. Adult education has always led in trying to democratize pedagogies, knowledge, and ways of thinking about the purpose of education. And I think being able to say, wow, we have at our hands this extraordinary set of resources of ideas and practices that we can dig into is an enormous resource for hope as we go forward into the future. Alongside this, and I think this is one of the things I really liked about what FutureLab is doing, is that it doesn't matter however you want to describe the dominant or most pushing social logic that's out there, which I think is linked to inequalities, which is linked to the corrosion of democracy. It never exhausts the full reality of human practice. There's always things happening under the radar in really interesting ways, sometimes unintentional, sometimes intentional. And actually, when you go to the back of the FutureLab document and you look at all these organizations and group across Europe, that alone is like, it's a reminder that if we reach out into communities, if we reach out beyond our institutions, we actually find, extraordinary capacities. And I think linking and thinking across that seems to me very crucial. But again, I see it as a massive resource for hope. This brings me to my second point. I cannot see how we can move and draw on these traditions and talk about change without actually being relatively explicit about the values and orientations that we're taking. Change has to have a direction. There's you can't talk about it in a simply vague way. So I think as part of our conversations today, we should be saying, well, what are the core values? Where do we want to go with this? If there is a democratic crisis, what do we want to replace it with? Now, necessarily, and it's the right thing, there's multiple answers to that. There should be multiple answers. There should be debates. All I can do is offer my own perspective on that and hope that that feeds into the discussion. From my perspective, drawing on adult education research, there's three core values. It's equality, freedom, and democracy, and they are interrelated. They have to be treated as a co-constituting whole in my mind. And I think equality, by equality I mean equality of condition, as Kathleen Lynch and John Baker put it. That is creating the conditions for flourishing in human life, not simply in terms of distribution of material resources, but in access to institutions, in care, love, care, and solidarity, and things like that. And I think being able to articulate different versions of that is particularly important, because one of the things that really worries me about where we are in our society at the moment is that a general consensus was never complete, I guess, but a general political consensus that some type of equality was important was there. I think for the first time in my lifetime, it's been questioned quite strongly. And I think, equality with other human beings, equality within or across borders is being put under quite serious question. So I think we have to re-articulate a conception of equality in and through adult education. I think sometimes we've made the mistake in adult education and in the progressive social movements more generally, in sort of seeding the whole idea of freedom. So we'll just talk about equality and distribution and recognition or participation. And I think freedom is equally important. One of the things you guys say you should get out more, but one of the things that I like to do is I look at how people use social media to talk about equality and freedom. And if you look up #freedom on lots of social media, you see a very interesting difference between #equality. And you see very typically a sort of freedom getting identified with the unconstrained choices of an individual. Now, I think there's a real truth. There is freedoms which operate like that. I have no doubt about it. I don't deny that. But I think having that conception of freedom alone is a massive mistake. It has to be nested in a conception of social freedom, of how various projects of autonomy on an individual, family, community, institutional, and society level either overlap or differ. And I think adult education should be in part about allowing people to explore commonalities and differences in that way. I think freedom, it has to be about the exploration of freedom together as individuals and within groups. And that seems to me of crucial importance. And again, I think there's resources in our tradition and our practices which speak to that. And I think all of this points us towards a conception of democracy as a way of life. And I'm going back to John Dewey. I mean, he wrote his book, Democracy in Education, 1916. But I think it was very, very far seen. It was like, democracy only works if there's an attempt to deepen democracy in every part of life. Democracy has to be restless. It has to seek beyond its own institutions. Say, well, okay, we've got working parliamentary institutions. How do we democratize communities? How do we democratize education? How do we democratize workplaces? And to think across that and to see it as a space for exploring what we mean by freedom, and a space for asking ourselves, well, look, are we providing people with the resources and the conditions to live equal and free lives? And that's what I'm getting at with that phrase, the democratic way of life. And that may seem, I'm well aware that may seem sort of very broad and philosophical and not connected to everyday life. But actually, it's very interesting if you trade. Part of my research is looking at how social movements understand what they do. And if you look at the past 20, 30 years of waves of progressive egalitarian social movements, they've all actually put these things together long before the question of populism and the democratic deficit came up. They said, actually, there's a problem here in the world, that there's powers that aren't answerable to us, that actually we need to do a type of thing with democracy that is inventive and creative. We can't simply stay where we are. We need to rethink it. So there's a whole worldwide, and this is the interesting thing. This is, it's global, and it's happening, alongside each other and intersecting with each other. There's been things happening in alter globalization movements, things like participatory budgeting, experiments in popular education and democracy, which are really inspiring. And empirical research on these things, for instance, on participatory budgeting, shows that actually people learn democracy a different way when they're given more space to participate. So I'm speaking in one sense philosophically, but I think there is evidence of these things happening in a real world and in a very interesting way. And this brings me to my third point, and it's sort of been implicit in what I've said already. I think adult education has been an extraordinary force, an unacknowledged extraordinary force in the building of living democracy. And it did that by being close and linked to progressive social movements, by being linked to what people were learning as active citizenships in the doing. And certainly in the context I'm familiar with, that has been loosened a little bit, that connection with egalitarian social movements. And I think part of how we renew democracy and respond to the crisis has to be saying, well, okay, what can we do at various levels to make sure that our educational institutions look outwards and link with groups of active citizens, link to movements. And I think actually within the FutureLab document, there's already that type of move. And I think that's a very powerful proposition, because I'm convinced that's the primary driver of reinventing democracy. I'm convinced that that's going to be the primary driver of dealing with the complexities and difficulties of inequalities and climate change and so forth. So I think it's that, alongside drawing on our past, alongside, reasserting core values, is to sort of say, well, what is happening out with social movements that we need to attend to. It brings me to my fourth point, which is that I think one of the things that really strikes me about the democratic crisis, the response to the democratic crisis, is that we are faced with incredible complexity in our world, incredible complexity, and sometimes simplistic answers are very appealing. But within adult education, I think when it's done properly, and I think Jack Mesro here is a key figure, there's not just an acknowledgement of the complexity of the world, but a valuing of it. And to say, well, actually, let's value complex thinking. Let's value ambiguity. Let's make that central to what adult education does, to respond to the complexity of the world, to allow for complex thinking. And I think that always means a type of situated capacity for critical reflection. I think that's always what that's going to come down to. And I think it also, and this is a Freirean idea, it also is, it has to be based on an ability to read the world as it is. You have to be able to say what the forces are that are shaping your life and able to respond to them. So that sort of mixture of complexity and reflexivity seems to me extremely important. This brings me to my final sort of departure point or coordinate, which is, and this does link to social media. Over the past few years, I've seen different versions of response to the development of social media. The first was extremely, it's very liberating. More recently, it's like it's all negative. I think we have to be able to analyze and understand what's happening. We have to understand the forces which are dominating, shaping it, and how people become autonomous producers within that. And that's always been the sort of emphasis in it. But about 6 months of sort of looking at far right propaganda in Ireland, I looked at it intensively. I began to think about this, that's not really enough. I think really what we need, and this is linked to this point about critical reflection, is we have to build a capacity to stand back, to break with, to critique from certain flows of information. And Oscar Necht, who's a really interesting thinker on adult education from Germany. He said, you know, at this moment, it's worth remembering that the very idea of critique, which emerged in the Enlightenment, was a response to a tsunami of printed text that people just couldn't handle. So in a way, I think part of our job is actually not simply to, you know, denounce or celebrate social media, to say, well, actually, also, how do we break with that, as well as intervene in it? So that's sort of the shape of what I wanted to offer you today. Basically, my position is this: that we're in deep trouble, that it is rooted in a historical way in long-term tendencies related to inequalities in power and wealth, and this is leading to a crisis in agency and meaning, but that we can respond, and we can draw on history, we can draw on contemporary practice, that we have to articulate and reassert core values, that we have to look to where people are actually enacting active citizenship as adult educators, that we have to embrace and work with complexity, and that we have to enhance our capacity for critique, particularly of social media. I hope, you know, I hope that these remarks are at least of some use to us this morning, because I really am very strongly supportive of the initiative and the research. So I want to thank you very much, and stop there.
Thank you so much. It was really inspiring and enriching. I think, well, you already have a lot of, well, a few comments there and questions. Yes, the Secretary General of EAEA thinks it was thought-provoking, and she will also steal the concept of democracy as a restless thing. So thank you so much. What I would like to well, tell people that they can ask questions in the chat. There are already two. Maybe we can start from there. So there is one from Uwe, the president of the EAEA. He asks, globalists establish structures which are not accountable. Probably he was referring to something that we mentioned. He asked whether we shouldn't equip learner to think and act globally. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I strongly agree with that. I would probably not use the term globalist, because it is certainly in the context I've been doing a little bit of research, it's been used to sort of suggest a sort of cabal of you know, conspiratorial directors of the global economy. But I do think part of dealing with complexity and part of it giving people real reflexive agency is a capacity to read the world, and that is about these structures in terms of economics and politics and how they work and how you can intervene. Because I think part of that sort of hopelessness is built on a sense that there's nothing to be done in the face of all this. There's simply nothing to be done. So I hope, you know, yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Perfect, thank you so much. Then there is another question from Durbel from Ireland. What else or should we in this project do to support democratic education? He's thinking about the area of freedom that you mentioned before.
Well, I think you're doing exactly what you should be doing, which is going and speaking to people and saying, how does this work, and trying to you know, take lessons from that which you bring back to the field. I don't think you're doing anything that you shouldn't be. I guess maybe that there's a slight, in terms of like in a way what I've tried to set up this morning is a dialogue between how I'm reading the project and myself. And there's two things that I've tried to emphasize which maybe aren't as strongly emphasized in those documents. And the first is that, you know, let's look at the sources of the democratic crisis and really try to get to grips with that, you know, to think sociologically, to be critical about the forces that are driving that. The second is active citizenship happens in projects, of course, and you have to pay attention to them. But I suppose that emphasis on social movements is sort of a more medium term. It's like, well, how do these various organizations work with each other, or do they work with each other? How do they catalyze and share information? You know, it's things like that. So the social movement has a sort of more medium-term focus than actual particular projects. But I suppose, you know, those might be obvious points. And it's nice to have you here, Derval. That's great. Thanks.
Just to comment on that, this will be also included in our recommendations. So either from well, addressed to providers and organizations, so to cooperate more and to build this mid-term and long-term relationship with other civil society organizations or movements, but also to the policymakers in a way to facilitate that and maybe build structures to do so. There is another question from Bjorn Wallen. What is your thought? What is your thoughts about the deliberative democracy, which has been rising in early 21st century?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks, Bjorn. Maybe I should have made that more explicit. I think I'm making, when I'm talking about a democratic way of life, it's quite strongly inspired by deliberative and participatory conceptions of democracy. And you're dead right, they've been growing since, I mean, participatory democracy was first used in the term in sort of post-68 for obvious reasons. Deliberative democracy has a longer history, but I think that's a fundamental idea, deliberative and reflexive democracy for adult education, because I think that's what adult education does very well. And what I was trying to allude to with that question of freedom and working through various interests and desires related to projects of autonomy is that actually deliberation is absolutely vital, because you can't satisfy all needs and desires equally, but they have to be understood and shared and worked through. And I think adult education is like one of the preeminent spaces for that. I mean, one of the things I've noticed, and this is increasing actually with students on our courses, which have a very strong dialogical deliberative emphasis in pedagogy, is people say, you know, and they're very often very experienced practitioners or educators, they say it's really strange, we haven't had time to talk through this. We're too busy. There's too much going on. There's too many targets. You know, there's not enough. I think there's simply not enough deliberation and reflexivity in our social system. And I think adult education can be a space which sparks that, supports that, and it fits perfectly with what we know from adult education pedagogy about what works. What gives people ownership of their own learning, which allows them to make choices, which allows them to feel empowered, and this to come back to something Gina said, which, you know, I don't see that as, you know, vocational training over here and you know, good adult education over there. I think it's about, you know, being able to, you know, find good work, to live well, to flourish. And it comes from being able to deliberate with others about how to go about that. So thanks very much, Bjorn, for helping me to clarify that point. I hope I've clarified it.
Bjorn, let us know via the chat. There is another question from Balázs from Hungary. He asks whether you see the impact of thematic social movements on adult education to promote equality, inclusion, and critical thinking. And he also says that he presumes that some governments like his show no interest in non-vocational adult education or fight back community initiatives. So what do you think about that?
Well, there's a lot in that. Hi, Balázs, how are you? Thanks for your comment. Yeah, I think what I'm proposing, and it's not a particularly new idea, it's not solely my idea or anything, is that egalitarian social movements work, which are seeking greater, you know, which are part of that restless democracy, are really important sites of social learning, that when we link in as adult educators, we learn a lot from them, but that also adult education can do something for those movements. You know, it can actually create greater degrees of deliberation and reflexivity. And I think that's one of the points. Adult education isn't simply a node or a wing of egalitarian social movements. It does something very particular and special, which is allowing people to give people the time and space to take ownership over them. So I see that as a sort of dialectical relationships, or at least I'm proposing that we renew a dialectical relationship between social movements and adult education wherever we can. Now, Hungary is, and I've heard you speak about this, and you obviously know much more about this than me, so it's very impressionistic, but we all know, I take a keen interest in Central and Eastern Europe, for primarily for family reasons, but we all know there's places where any type of critical adult education has been eviscerated. And I was listening to Timothy Ireland 2 weeks ago talking about recent changes in Brazil, which has one of the most sustained attempts to sort of build a sort of participatory, meaningful form of adult education, where it's, apparently Bolsonaro said when he was elected, I'm going to take a flamethrower to the ideas of Paulo Freire, a flamethrower, and he's trying to dismantle it. And so we are seeing in the most authoritarian spaces, because they know that engaged deliberation is not good for authoritarian regimes, that they're trying to shut it down. In those circumstances, I can't, it's not for me to speak in a room like this and say, oh, I know exactly how to handle a difficulty in Hungary. I don't. But I think we have had examples of extraordinary adult education, including in Eastern Europe, when they faced previous oppression, where people did very good adult education for citizenship, nevertheless, in the spite of things. And I think in those circumstances, if the state is not going to pay for it or is going to actually stop it, I think we have to find ways of engaging elsewhere. But that's easy to say, and I don't want to be simplistic. I don't think there's a one straightforward answer. But thanks very much, Balash, for those comments.
Yeah, there was also another similar question from Olga from Belarus, but I think you answered already. What we would like to do still, even if we are a bit late, is to invite everyone to go to menti.com. There is the code in the chat. There is just a quick question about what do you want to highlight from this keynote speech. It would be good to have the opinions of all the participants, as we are many. So my colleague has just posted it again, and my other colleague will also show the results in the in a moment via the screen sharing. I think it would be good to let Dr. Finnegan know also what was your takeaway from this speech. Mm-hmm. So take crisis as an opportunity. Adult education has a long history supporting democracy. Mm-hmm. If you want to comment, of course, you're very welcome. Well, some compliments. There are reasons for hope.
Yeah, after a very long, trying year, it's very important to remember that. Okay. This is very interesting, by the way. I haven't seen this done before. Thanks.
I'm happy it works because we're also not very, personally, I'm not very experienced, but yeah, my colleagues are. Can we maybe scroll down? I don't know how it works. We don't see it. Ah, yes, perfect. Link with social movements, importance of values. Yes, that was actually our starting point as well. That was very interesting that you, of course, you also mentioned that when we change, where do we go? What do we hope for? We are in deep trouble, yes, but there is hope. Okay, so thank you so much again for being with us. I think, yes, the participants are very enthusiastic, and it was very inspiring for everyone. So I hope you can stay for the rest of the event, but if not, we understand you're very busy. I would like now to then give the possibility for the people to have a short break. We are 5 minutes late, but I will still would like to give you the possibility to be away from the screens for 15 minutes. So we will be back at 11:20. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Francesca.
And by the way, you please do not log out. Just switch off your microphone and camera, and that will be enough. In the meanwhile, I'm replying to the question that was just put in the chat by Carla. Yes, we will share this the video of the event, but yeah, we will need to see how. Most probably we will upload it on YouTube first, and then it will be in our website. So in the page of the conference, I will share the direct link with you. You will find it soonish. Here you have the direct link to the page of this conference. No problem. We know June is a very busy month, so no problem for joining late. And yes, also the presentations, the one that you will see now, will be shared. Okay, so maybe while we are all coming back, we can do this small activity still on Menti. So it should, if you haven't closed it, you should have the slide open already. If not, you have the code over there. So what we would like you to think of is whether your organization is reactive, proactive, or change-oriented. And to do so, we put not only the question on Mentimeter, but also like a short explanation. This was actually taken from probably the application of our project. So we defined, and also was done already before, we defined being reactive as helping adults, organization, and society to adapt to the changes. What Gina was also referring to as a repair shop, which again is nothing to be against or ashamed of, but then what we define as proactive is to help anticipate situations, future situations. And what we define as a change-oriented for an organization is to help create new competencies and practices which are necessary condition for any change or development to take place. So in the next slide, you will be asked, what do you think how do you think your organization can be defined? And again, it's not a competition, is not yeah, we are not checking on you, is not something we will judge, but we would like to know how you position your organization in this. So yeah, proactive and change-oriented are gaining points. So you should not be really ashamed if you really think that you are only reactive, because in a way it's also a matter of resources, awareness, structures. So we will try to see also the reasons for being reactive or proactive only, and not change-oriented. And as was said before, we will do so by launching soon the guidelines that you will hear about in a moment, and also the policy recommendation that you will hear in the third session of this event. Okay, so while there are a very good number of change-oriented organizations among us, maybe we go to the next slide where I tell you, well, you can actually read it yourself. I think it's easier, but how we define change-oriented adult education, and in this is also with this definition we embrace also the part of the provision. So change-oriented adult education encompasses an approach, philosophy, and set of teaching and learning methods that seek to create individual and also social change. Learners can also move beyond individual transformation to a collective empowerment based on critical awareness, new ways of thinking, and participation. This model facilitates a process of conscious realization for learners as they work together, taking action, including potential acts of resistance towards a more democratic, equal, and ethical world. That is the direction we discussed before, we would like to go to. So again, what do you think the provision of your organization or your members, because I know many of you are national organizations, can be defined? Oh no, I think we went 1, 2. No, sorry, that was it. What are the challenges that you and your members face while trying to offering a change-oriented provision? So we're really talking about practice, right? Programs, courses. So in here you can type, so it might take a while. And maybe we can actually leave it on to be answered during the, yes. Money structures up, the first words that come in. Finances, politics, ethnicity, variety. Money is getting bigger. Finances is now taking the main role here. Political smallness, that's indeed something to consider. Fear, the lack of safe spaces. Digital literacy, yes, that we will discuss in a moment as well. Readiness of society. So I will leave it here because we are eager to hear also from our colleagues. But yes, you can continue contributing to this while we hear the other presentations. So now I would like to give the floor to Thomas Fritz, our colleague from VHS Wien. He and his colleagues, Dilek and Gerald, are responsible for the development of the FutureLab guidelines, and he will tell us a bit more how the work is developing on those, and also discuss some of the principles that that we are thinking about when drafting this document. So Thomas, the floor is yours. I see we see already your presentation, so
fine, great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the fantastic introduction and the words from Ireland that were at the same time very pessimistic and full of hope. And thanks also for pointing out that adult education has a long history and a long tradition of participation, democracy, etc. What I'm trying to do now in the next 10 minutes is to just briefly give you an overview of what the guide's going to be like. I'm not going into detail here because I think that's boring. I just want to show some principles and some orientations that we have taken. We're right in the middle of writing it, actually. So yeah. what we try to do is to, as dialogue seems to be central in critical pedagogy and change-oriented adult education, or any change-oriented education as such, we try to base the guide on not our assumptions, what we want users of the guide to know, but what questions there were. We collected questions from educators on change-oriented adult education, and we try to answer this question, which is, of course, and this highlights sort of the problems of the so-called experts in this process, which is, of course, not all the questions that we wanted to answer were being posed, and we still try to keep to those questions that people asked. We also try to base the guide on theory, but also include a lot of practical examples. Actually, all the examples, not all, but most of the examples that Gina quoted, the 60 good practice examples, and these 60 have to be, to these 60s, we have to add all the examples that we've seen in the webinar. So we look through all the webinars again and try to include those. So it's both a little bit theory-based. It's not sort of just practical and just things that work, but it's also committed to practice, because we think it's important to provide some ideas and some guidelines as to how to implement change-oriented adult education. As you see, there are always just a couple of words on each slide, because I don't believe in overloaded slides anyway. We have the theory, we said theory-based. There is a very strong link to critical education, and we've already heard the name Freire mentioned, and there will be more mentions of Freire. And I think it's something that is old, but eternally new and fresh and eternally challenging. There is a link to all the works that's been done on community education, as we can see in all the good practice examples. The ones that stick out most are those not provided in in-house course environments, but based in communities. And we'll see later how important that is. And it's also based on something that actually has a long history in the EAEA and in our partnership, which is outreach, which means that we don't sit at home and wait for people to come and give them what we think they need, but to go out of our buildings, as nice as they are, and meet people and talk to them and start a dialogue on what they want and what they need. I think one of the main things that we have to take from Freire is that education never was and never will be neutral. So it's always a question of taking a stance, taking up a position, always to be on the side of the learners. And we call them learners-actors in the guide, because we don't think these people are just learners that need to learn something, but these people are people who want to act and want to become active. So we have to take that into consideration, which changes our attitude towards what we call learners a lot. So I would even venture to say that there is a little bit of a paradigm change in education. I've seen your Mentimeter answers on how change-oriented and how proactive all the institutions involved here and present here today are. But looking at the situation in Austria, I would say the situation looks pretty different. We are sort of basically always in a repair shop context. And what we need to do is change that repair shop into a collaborative workshop where everybody who's involved works together. Because if we wash our hands, this is again Freire, of the conflict, and this links nicely to what Dr. Finnegan said. If we wash our hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless, automatically this means that we side with the powerful. So it's not a question of being neutral, of being not political, but of being political, but very transparent in this position of taking sides. Yeah, right. So basically, I've tried to sum up what's in the guide by formulating a couple of principles, because I think principles are always better in this context than so-called methodologies, because methodologies can be used in different ways. And you can use what we have, for example, the fishbowl as one of the methodologies suggested, but you can use methodologies like fishbowl in a very authoritarian way. So it's basically this, you could also use dialogue in a very authoritarian way. But basic one principle is dialogue based, and the main principle I think is that learners are co-authors, co-designers of their learning in ways of deciding what they want to do, what they need, what they want to achieve. Sorry, I was just having to let somebody in. That the aims of whatever program we do, whatever we provide, have to be formulated by the learners themselves and not by us. So the assumption is not that we know everything and we tell the rest of the world what they should do, which is correct, of course, but we don't admit that. So it's a question of, in that context, having the aims being formulated by the learners and actors themselves, so that they are, yeah, it was said ownership was one of the words, and I will introduce the word ownership into the guide. We've sort of lost it somewhere. It's collaborative decision-making processes of learners and actors and teachers. And learners decide on the what, the when, and the where of the program. So I think it's the aims that are decided by the learners. It's also, and that was a question that was asked, what is the correct rhythm of courses offered in change-oriented adult education? Is once a week, 1.5 hours enough? And I think that's not a question we need to answer. That's a question of what the learners, actors have to decide, how much time they want to devote and how much time they want to spend on that process. And also something that the word safe spaces was mentioned. It's also a question of where this will take place. Is it a community center? Is it a library? Is it a park? Is it whatever? Is it the place where learners, actors feel safe and where they feel at home? So it could be the home of one of the learners as well. And basically, I think what change-oriented adult education is about is, again, linking up to the keynote, is that what learners need to do to improve the situation of social injustice and discrimination, which of course involves a critical analysis on the roots and the sources and the causes of this situation, and of collaboratively deciding what to do to change that situation. And mainly not on an individual basis, so that one person can liberate herself and the others stay where they are, but as a strengthening of collaborative work, which I think is also some contribution to democracy education. Democracy education, as has been said in one of the webinars, is best achieved through democracy teaching in a democratic way, involving all the learners, actors in decision-making on methods as well, etc. Yeah, and Carlos Ribeiro said in one of the webinars, he said a sentence that I really like a lot. It's not doing something for people, but it's doing something with people. So it's not a situation where we as experts on education know better what people need and what ways they can take to achieve these goals that they have defined themselves, but to do it together. So this 4 is sort of one of the keywords, which involves for me, sorry, I'm always looking at my watch to keep time, which involves probably a change in the teacher's role. And I noticed yesterday when working on the guide that we have to define the role of teacher more clearly, and also perhaps use a different word. But there's a word that comes to mind automatically, is facilitator, which is something that Freire denies very strongly. So we'll have to, in parallel to learn as actors, we have to find a new word, which we will. You'll find it as soon as you get the guide. You will find a new word for that. So, but basically, it's the teacher's role that has to be changed, that will be changed, and that is probably difficult and demanding, because teachers are teachers because they know everything better, and because they want to tell the world what they know, and they want to tell people what they should learn. Basically, we are, and they don't, and they're not in a tradition of being sort of transparent about their aims. So there are no hidden curricula, there are no hidden goals, there are no hidden aims. It all has to be very clear. So one of the other key words in this guide will be the word transparency, to make it clear what we want to do and to have a stance. So I think it's much more important than methodology is attitude towards learners, attitude towards learning, attitude towards change, and always add the word social to the word change, because it's always a social change that we're looking for. So looking at the principles again, and looking at the institution's roles and this series of support structure, I think basically teachers are not there to teach, but they are there to support learners in their process, wherever that process goes. I mean, there has to be limits, of course, but that's clear with the transparency of the teacher and their aims as well. And I think the institution's role, and that's vital for me, is that the institution is not there just to organize, to evaluate, to see that everything works fine, and to get the money. Of course, that's their role, but it's the main role in this process would be to support teachers in their roles, to in turn support learners. And we had a discussion in the project consortium whether it wouldn't be a good idea for institutions to put change-oriented added dedication into their mission statements. Teachers need a backup. Teachers need support. They need to know what they're doing is what the institution also wants. And the last point, and this is the point I'm going to finish with, is, and I think that's also something that's already been said, is that there needs to be a structure, there needs to be a philosophy of critical reflection of the process in education, of the process of education in the social context, of the process of education in the social context within a framework, within a frame of contradictory and prohibitive parameters in society. So I think critical reflection, we see that from projects all over Europe that have been collected as good practice, that critical reflection is key to adult education that looks for change and wants to change social situations for learners. This was mainly a short advertisement to what the guide will look like. There's more in the guide already than those couple of words I've presented today, but I think it's always a little bit boring to present written texts orally. Questions, suggestions, criticisms, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Are there any quick questions or suggestions that you want to share? In the meanwhile, I invited people to go to Menti because there was a question on principles, and I think from the people that are that replied, I think they share a bit your concern at the beginning, what you said about Austria. So we asked if they believe that the principles that you just described are applied in their countries, and the dialogue-based approach is so far at 3 out of 5. So yes, so and so. Learners as co-author, less than 3. So could be better. Provision based on learners' needs, in the middle, exactly 3. Educator support learner is much more present, and I think I totally agree. In a way, it's our colleagues are doing a wonderful job, often also compelled with constraints, structural and financial constraints. And then the last 2, emphasis of critical reflection is again in the middle, and institutions support educators is also a bit there. So there is room for improvement there. So yes, you receive also some questions in the chat. So there is a question from Oleg: what can work in society where populism dominates and there are no tradition of critical education? How change-oriented institutions appear and what they can do? Well, this is this is a challenging one.
Oh yeah, yeah. If I knew, I wouldn't be sitting here, but I would be somewhere else. But I think that history, and Fergal referred to history quite a lot. History is a history of resistance to dominant opinions, of joint collaborative resistance, and I think that's what we have to foster. And I think critical pedagogy and change-oriented adult education is a way of doing that. It is never mainstream, I think. And I think as soon as change-oriented adult education becomes mainstream, it's done something wrong. So I think it's always a question of resisting power structures, resisting non-traditions of critical thinking. And I doubt that there is anywhere in this world where there's not a small group of people who have a critical attitude towards education and learning and society. It's just that their voices are not heard. And that is a problem that adds to something else. I mean, I think voice is something that we have to give, that we have people to help people develop themselves. We don't give them voice, they have it. But what we need to do is to create contexts in which, as Spivak said, hegemonial listening is that people have voice, but nobody listens to them. So we have to make sure, and we have to do our best to make these voices loud, and they can be listened to. There is a quote that I didn't put on my slides. I don't know why, because it's my favorite one, by Licinio Lima from the first, I think it was the first webinar. And he said, adult education has to become more dangerous again. I think we're busy being nice and doing what people want from us, but we don't have to do that. I think we need to be more dangerous, and this is risky, I know. There are examples in Austria that dangerous groups have been sort of like, yeah, been taken their funding away, but we're still trying to be loud, to be noisy, to be dangerous, and that again is a fact that is not compatible with being mainstream. And I think if you look at the adult education institutions and situations in our countries, we probably see a mainstream development that is repair shop oriented, and we see small cells of active people that are change oriented. And we need to, and Yuri put in one of his presentations, I remember that well, and I think it was the first presentation of his research, was that we cannot expect governments to finance things that are actually not working towards their goals, but towards the goals of other people. So I think we need to be, I don't know, modest in terms of resources and resilient in terms of enduring times of crisis. And as Fergal said, we're in a major crisis, and I don't think that neoliberal concepts of education will be able to solve that crisis at all. But perhaps change-oriented education can do that. And Fergal also used the word revolution. And well, this is not a Communist Party advertisement here, but I think there is and somebody wrote that we're in a learning revolution. Yes, we are in a learning revolution. We're in a revolution, and it's small. We have to admit that, in a revolution of what learning is supposed to mean. And learning is not acquiring skills like everybody else thinks. It's not about measurement of learning outcomes that somebody else defines, but it's about safe spaces, it's about open spaces, and it's about possibilities. And I think change-oriented adult education is the place where these spaces have to be created. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Thomas. There were a few other questions and one comment. Maybe you can have a look at the chat and maybe reply individually, because time is running out, and we still have a contribution from our colleague Olivier from France, from La Ligue de l'Enseignement. So Olivier is the director of Imagine, the Pole Education on Image, Media and Information at La Ligue de l'Enseignement. He's sensitive to the values of popular education and eager to contribute to the innovation and renewal of image and media education. And he was the coordinator of a project called L'Éveilleur d'Infos, and he will tell us more about this. And I guess also touch upon many of the comments and then opinions that were shared so far. So Olivier, yes.
Hello.
You're there. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thanks for your invitation. First, I apologize in advance for the poor quality of my English, so I will try to do as well as possible. Don't hesitate to interrupt me if it's not clear. So yeah, my name is Olivier Mania. I work for the Ligue de l'Enseignement for a long time, because I started there in 1998. In Seine-Saint-Denis, which is a department north from Paris. And so I started there when I came back from Morocco, when I made a few experiences in French Institute. Then in North Paris, I worked on the colonialism and the impact of Algerian war on French citizenship of youth, mainly because there was a kind of secret on these memories. So I made educational exhibition there on this period of history. Then I became a territorial journalist. It's a kind of communication more than journalism, because you do it for politics. For some politics, then cinema hall programmation, so many different things. And in 2011, I arrived in Imagine as a coordinator of this small association, which is a sector of La Ligue de l'Enseignement, media literacy sector. So we work also media education, media literacy. So I started there in 2011, and in 2015 there was the bombing attacks in France, in Paris, bombing attack against a newspaper, a magazine whose name is Charlie Hebdo. And later there was bombing attacks in restaurants, cafes. And after this, I decided to organize training about propaganda of ISIS, the ISIS propaganda on social networks, because there was an issue on this, very still. But I wanted also to understand how it affects our mind and how we can substitute an identity to another, like a ready-made identity to achieve, to give a meaning to our life. And some people try to give, I think they find a meaning substituting their identity to a very different one, a kind of more religious. So after these trainings dedicated to propaganda, I had an increasing awareness of I was in a wrong way, because there is a global radicalization of our societies. So it's not only about one religion, one issue. There is a kind of global radicalization which is connected to a new era of information, a new ecosystem. So the issues are much more wider. I don't know if I'm clear. It's wider issues. You interrupt me. You can interrupt me if I'm not very clear. Is it okay? Yeah, it is. Okay. So we entered in a new era. So I wanted to work on media literacies in a wider way, because it affects all kind of belief. It affects the way we construct our opinion. So of course there was a kind of sectarism in all kind of speeches. And so there is disinformation on social media, of course we know, but it can come for different purposes. It can come from states who want to affect, I don't know, who want to weaken the European Union, spreading fake news to create a kind of division, to make the European Union perceived as a weak link. So it can affect also Brexit, the presidential elections, to spread false informations. Also, you can spread false information on social media for another gain, which can be an advertising gain. You want to gain some money, and you see that if you spread misinformation, you will gain more money than if you spread trusted informations. So it can come from states, it can come to gain some advertisement. So the disinformations can come also to gain visibility on social network. So there is a big issue on this. The new ecosystem of this, the new landing, is that there is a massification of information, which is a kind of revolution as important as the creation of the printing by Gutenberg. So because there is more and more informations who are published, so it affects the way we will build our own knowledge, because we must ask ourselves the question: is this new era heralding a knowledge society or a new middle age? If there is so many information, so many false information in that big ocean, what what kind of society does it announce? Because the massification of information, it has a flattening effect. So many informations from so contradictory, it flats everything. So are all the informations equal? If the information is so much and so antagonistic, can I believe what it works for me? Is it possible to pick up, to choose what arranges me? So we can see it, we can observe this on Google searches, because Google searches are not neutral. There is difference in terms used. So it leads to different searches, to different results. So on social networks, the phenomenon of algorithmic bubbles, it creates micro communities, it creates micro societies, and even micro popularity. So it's a world very with many parcels. So the objective of an education on all this is to build skills and how do I say this? To build skills on an inquiry, an active inquiry, and a critical reflection on the messages we receive, on the messages we create, because media literacy, it aims is both empower individuals and to give them the tools to create a democratic society. So difficulties are real because there is democratic issues. I won't go in this topic so much because Fergal Finnegan gave you many keys on this. But what I would add is that Alexis Tocqueville wrote there is a kind of democracy frustration, very typical in democracies, because he said democracies are based on the promises of equality, on the possibility offered to everyone to freely build their life. Is it a very important promise? But there is a kind of disappointment, which is even deeper in a society when everyone sees everyone. So you can observe the life of many people around you and you can compare to them. So the challenge is democracy, is to change the culture about how we make sense of information, what we trust, and how we understand our own role in information processing. Voilà, so in La Ligue de l'Enseignement, we made many trainings, 3 days trainings for our, comment dire, formateurs, comment on dit, Francesca, formateurs?
Educators or trainers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, for educators, we make many trainings, and we create also experiences on the ground and educational path. So after experimenting this for more than a year, we created an educational path, which was made collectively with different federations of La Ligue de l'Enseignement, who are located in all departments of France, who are working on education populaire methods. So to learn all around, to learn in all your life, in all kind of spaces. So during all your life and all kind of spaces. And we work to create an educational path dedicated to media literacy. So what we did is that we choose to combine a few different aspects of media literacy. We choose first to create a tool which could be efficient about checking news, to give skills about how I check news, to create a tool of pedagogy of to have a pedagogy on journalism. And third, to create a tool which could be an answer to the spreading of conspiracy theories. Voilà. So this path name is Les Veilleurs de l'Info. So I don't know how to translate it, maybe news keepers, news watchers, I don't know, Les Veilleurs de l'Info. So it is 6 sessions. And first session is named Info Profiler. It's, we said to the people, to the participants, okay, you're just out, you just received your diploma of journalism. You just go out your school, you found your first job, and you work for a magazine which name is More Than True. So this magazine does not publish any interesting information, but informations are verified in More Than True. So the editorial line is touted, but the information is still true. So you go out and you receive 20 publications. We give this publication to the participants. And in these publications, there is newspaper, there is tweets, there is satirical sites. And we said, okay, you don't have internet now because you're in the train. Would you publish this if you had 5 minutes, just intuitively, instinctively? Would you publish these publications or not? And then they have to talk and to make their decision, to write it down on the dashboard. Would I publish or not? And then the facilitator asks them to give their sample of documents to their neighbor, because there is different group of people. You can do it with adults, you can do it with youth, you can do it with many people. And then on the second part, they have internet. They have internet so they can check news. So first they check the news just to distinguish instinctively the probable from the true. And secondly, they have to check, not instinctively, they have to check the news on reliable sources. And we ask them also to determine, of course, if it is fake or true, but also they need to be able to tell whether an image has been tampered. They have to say, in the case of false information, they have to say the possible motivations of the author. Voilà. So on the second session, we work on the information fabrication with a set of vignettes, of magnets, on which are inscribed the stages of the editorial creation process, name of professions, linked to journalism, and with the definitions of this profession. And so the game instruction is simple. You arrange the thumbnails in such a way that it would reconstruct the process of making the information. On session 3, we have an editorial conference. The idea here is to give food for thought on the hierarchization of information within the framework of a debate within an editorial team. So you have to choose what is the most important. So you have to, you have to argue on this. On session 4, we use a tool we created in a partnership, as part of a partnership with FutureLabAE. So this tool is translated in English. If you want to experiment this, the name of this tool is Info Hunter. It is a serious game. So then we have made a fake conspiracy film on COVID-19. So the movie is locked up on the website, but this is free. You can subscribe. So you can say with how many people you want to experiment this. So you indicate the number of people, The host do not say anything about the content. He's showing the movie. The participants are then invited to vote by show of hands. Does it information seems interesting to me? Is information serious? I will share this information. So then we note the results of the show of hands, and then during a second broadcast, the film is interrupted 5 times, and with the opening on the screen of a survey notebook, inviting to contextualize, to make your own inquiry, to verify your source, to identify a cognitive bias, like the Kuleshov effect, for instance. On session 5 and 6, the 2 last sessions are named radically felt plots. So we always try to learn, but to learn in a good atmosphere, to give appetite for learning. So what we do in these sessions is to make parody with participants after a draw. In this draw, we ask people to put on paper a guilty person. Then we pick up the paper, a victim, a mobile, and we pick up this, and we make a draw, and we gather the participants in small group. We ask them to write a narrative. The rule of the game is to use the same type of argumentative construction as conspiracy theorists. So then to be full of certainties, to have an indignant tone, and after the presentation, we choose the best theory, and we prepare a debate between a part of the participants who will have to argue for this parody in a very serious way. They must try to justify, to prepare a debate, to justify the argue of this theory using internet, using you can corrupt pictures, I don't know. You can use many cognitive BIs we introduce to them. And the other they confront in the debate with another group who has prepared arguments with facts ethics, so in a more journalistic way, so with journalistic methods. So the idea of these debates, which last only 5 minutes, it's very short time. The most important is how they prepare it and what do they feel. And the idea is to make them feel something like, okay, I thought it would be very easy to argue against this fake theory we made together. And I thought it would be very easy, but we don't use the same methods. We are not so equal with methods of arguments, because they have all rights and I must respect the facts. So we want to create something like the need of an ethics, because sometimes we share misinformation because we have an advantage to share misinformation. So we want to make people more responsible with this, because the advantage to share fake information, it can be for your social media profile to give you more popularity, because indignations is more viral than neutrality or than something more quiet. So sometimes there is a kind of mental convenience to spare us the effort of a longer and more complex reasoning, and just to confirm a belief and to share it on social media to gain an advantage of visibility. Yeah. So, voila. Perfect. So just maybe to conclude, I can answer you on on the cognitive bias, if you have questions on this. Just to conclude maybe on the impact over the last 5 years, les veilleurs de l'info, we trained 250 trainers who have built a base of skills and a capacity to act. So other training courses, such as the program, we built another program in partnership with the Alliance Française Network, who is all around the world. So it will help build skills on social media with French speaking teachers. So we are also conscious with impact that we must take in account the cultural context of our consumption of information. When we are asked to understand how the media work, we are taught to be critical, so we emphasize that some publications are more worthy of respect than other publications. However, not everyone agrees on what makes a reliable source. So we need to brag about personal responsibility, as I told you, and ethics. So more and more, we develop experiences in creating online news media in French suburbs. But these media are the fruit of the collaboration between a journalist and the participants. It is not media made by a journalist only. They create media with participants, with habitants, with residents of these places, of these suburbs. So we do this because there is a kind of gap between the experience and the expertise. For many people who watch the local newspaper disappear slowly, and also the news reporting them it seems out of touch with their realities. So the issues that they believe it affects their life that feel often ignored. So we try to create new kind of media, because on these democratic issues, we must work on fact-checking. We must work also on the cognitive bias, but there is also an expression to encourage on informative expression on social media. Voilà. I'm so sorry for my English. I'm really sorry.
No, absolutely not. It was clear, and it was really nice to see a practice like yours put in place. I think in the chat we can see that people are very inspired by what you did and you are doing. So yes, thank you so much. We are very late, and I would thus suggest to skip the break. I hope it's not too burdensome for you. But if you can still ask questions, we will share them with Olivier offline, and we will share with you his answers. So please do so. Okay, so our panelists are already here, and I don't want to miss the opportunity also to discuss with them. So I would really go very quickly through the presentation that I prepared on the recommendations. I think what it should be said is that it's work in progress. So this is why I can also have I can also skip some of the slides, because I think this event will really contribute to this as well, so to the document as well. Nevertheless, I just show you here what we are planning to do. Of course, we are we are basing our work on what was done in the project so far. So it was mentioned many times. So there was this collection of good practices, among which the project that Olivier described is included, but also an analysis. And in the analysis, we also have a lot of theoretical background that was drafted by Jiri Manninen from the University of Eastern Finland, and also colleagues from SWEB, Irina, who worked on the document as well. So that would be our main the basis of our work, as it has been for the last 3 years. We will of course take into consideration the contributions of the learners, because we organize these 2 courses that Gina mentioned, and a lot has been asked and discussed on the challenges for change-oriented adult education, especially in the fields of democracy and digitalization. So a lot will come from there, and a lot will come from multiplier events, including this one, as I was saying. We will also try to have focus groups and interviews. We are now, that's a project issue, we are now negotiating with the agency to have more working days for this, and we have the resources, so we will see about that. But in any case, in the right part of the screen, you can see the outline. So we will not only provide policymakers at various levels with recommendations, but also give some introduction to the concept, but also on the benefits of change-oriented adult education. And I would like to just mention here briefly what we also discussed that would be interesting in having, in a way, because change-oriented adult education is a further step of adult education. What we started with was really to think about what are the preconditions to make adult education work, and therefore change-oriented education. And there are issues here that are very familiar to all of you. So of course the focus should be on the governance of adult education. So we know that adult education is very fragmented, so we need more structures and legislations. We also focus on the partnerships. We discussed that before in the previous presentation. So how change-oriented education is carried out by non-formal provider, and often even NGOs, should be acknowledged, and therefore partnerships should be built in that sense. Also with other civil society organizations. We have seen social movements before, but also and especially with other sectors and the policymakers. We don't want to forget our main focus on the target groups. So Thomas mentioned the importance of outreach strategies. We also think that in-service trainings for educators are needed to make this happen. We also want to have the learner at the center, and the focus on the progression of the learner, rather than maybe checking boxes on learning outcomes only, because of course the benefits of change-oriented adult education are for not only for the individual, but also for community and society, and those are difficult to measure. And of course, we need to have a provision which is affordable and accessible. In terms of the needs of providers and trainers is, again, well, probably a lot of research also on the impact of change-oriented adult education, more structural dialogue with policymakers and other actors. When it comes to democracy, and actually I think this is a mistake when it comes to digitalization, but it's the same, it's kind of mirrored with also democracy, the other team, and I can actually talk about those in parallel. We need citizens to have the structure, so to access the digital space. This is of course instrumental then to get to more informed and empowered learners. So that is something that is really a precondition. So to fill the digital gap. We also need potential learners and educators to be aware of the transformation, and I think policymakers in that could raise awareness, provide debates, spaces, campaigns. And also what we need is to policymakers to recognize the importance of involving more actors, including the sector of adult education in a transformation of our society. That could be the democratic challenges, but also the digitalization transformation. As I said, this is kind of a parallel discussion for democracy. Maybe I can just touch upon the recommendation for EU policymakers, because I would like to ask then the panelists that will intervene afterwards to maybe comment on one of two of those. So the first thing that I would like to underline is that we need to recognize the role of change-oriented education in transforming learners and society. This has been very clear throughout the whole event, but there is still this approach that what Gina was referring to as well. So to have adult education only as a repair shop, but also the fact that transformations are not changeable, that in a way we cannot shape what is happening around us. And I think this is a mental shift that we need to do, all of us, but also that we need to recognize that adult education is in the right place to actually act towards this. We need to consider adult education organizations at the European level, but can also be, of course, national and local level, as crucial cooperation partner in reaching the objective of the European Commission, could be, if we talk about European international organization, but also national objectives, policy objective. The good practice that we collected really focus on equality, fairness of society, environment and sustainability, critical thinking, and then the digital transformation. So in a way, all those adult education can really be a prominent actor in all those fields, if we want to call them fields, but we know that it's all interlinked, and the pandemic showed us. So yes, consider the sector as an important player in this. We also need to monitor and quantify all the provision of adult education and learning. As we have seen today, adult education, change-oriented education often takes place in non-mainstream courses. Therefore, we need more data on that. We need to map the resources and see whether the allocation is right. And we also need to move from an employability focus towards a more general one that I already mentioned. So we need to increase cooperation between policy, practice, and research, the famous triangle. And we need to include change-oriented adult education in transformative learning as a priority in the agenda for adult learning. We have here the rapporteur for the Economic and Social Committee, so Tatiana Brabuschiene, and also we have Anif O'Reilly, who is one of the coordinators in the countries, and in this particular case, Ireland. So maybe we will hear from them more. But yes, so one of the focuses should be change-oriented education, transformative learning. And then again, to recognize the importance of change-oriented education in achieving the goals of the skills agenda. in the communication is written that people need to acquire transversal skills such as working together, critical thinking, and creative problem solving. And of course, we have been seeing this today via the different contribution and also the practical example that we are doing so as a sector. I will stop here because I already took too much time, but I invite you to stay tuned. We will publish this by the end of August when the project will finish. So thank you so much, and I ask my colleagues to put Niamh, Tatiana, and also Carlos Catali that I haven't mentioned, but we're also very happy to have him with us. So I proceed the very multitasking approach to the presentations. So Niamh O'Reilly is the CEO of the National Adult Learning Organization in Ireland, AUNTAS. She's an educationalist with expertise in educational equality, learner voice, community education, policy analysis, organizational development, and governance. So welcome, Niamh. Then we have Tatiana Brabuskiene, who is the head of international relations, Lithuanian Education and Science Trade Union. She represents this organization in the Economic and Social Committee. And she's therefore part of the committee workers group. She's currently, as I was saying, the rapporteur of the European Agenda for Adult Learning 2030. Welcome, Tatiana. Thanks for joining us. And then last but not least, Carlos Catali from the European Commission. He's a senior expert of skills and qualification. He works at the Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion, so DG EMPL, as we all know. So thanks a lot, Carlo, also for joining us. So maybe I can just ask you to comment on what I presented, and if you were here also before, also what you heard through the day, like an introduction round, that would be great. Thank you. Yes, maybe I can ask Niamh to start. Sorry, I just left the ball there.
Thanks very much, Francesca. I didn't want to jump in there. This has just been a really helpful morning. The food for thought. I suppose what I was going to say when you asked me to kind of review the recommendations and to what I'm going to say now, I think it'll probably be a bit more nuanced. So it gives me a bit more time to reflect. Obviously, I'm not a policy maker. I work for AINTHUS, so it's like a little national version of the EAEA. So delighted to see all our European friends here today. And this project is led out by my colleague Derval. It's really important, I suppose, maybe just to start off, I mean, we're trying to influence policy in AINTHUS, and our main focus is educational equality for adults. So that's our, the primary aim of AINTHUS. And I suppose just to ask myself the question, like, what if we don't take on these recommendations? Like, what's the benefit of that when I look at it? I agree, of course, with everything that's there, but we know the status quo isn't working. It hasn't worked for educational equality. We know that the impact COVID has had on exacerbating education disadvantage. We have so much, evidence and statistics, particularly like the traveller engagement has been down 25% last year than the year before, already a really marginalised community. So I suppose that was a question that I had. And it was another question that I asked myself as well. I was talking to a policymaker in the Department of Further and Higher Education, which is a new department in Ireland. And I was asking, like, where do you see community education in this new department? And they cautioned me and said, make sure community education doesn't become another form of provision. Make sure it doesn't become domesticated. So it's really interesting listening to Thomas as well, because I think there's also a recognition on the other side of policymakers of the importance and the value of community education as well. So, I mean, I could talk a bit more in detail, but I don't want to go into a monologue, Francesca, and give our other colleagues. So I might just kind of come back afterwards and look at why the recommendations are important. So if I can leave it there, Francesca, is that okay?
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Who wants to continue?
I can jump.
Okay.
As Francesca has already mentioned, currently the rapporteur in the European Economic and Social Committee for the opinion which was requested by Slovenian presidency on adult learning, and I'm really happy that adult learning is high in the agenda also for the presidency country, and they will be having 2 events in September and October, and I hope that you will be also participating there actively. I don't know if they will be having hybrid or fully online, but it doesn't matter. It's important that adult learning is kind of having a voice at European level, and it returns back, because I've had a feeling that it's for 10 years, it's like a little bit frozen. So therefore, I found your recommendations are really relevant in the period we're experiencing now with this rapid invention, spread of new technologies, which of course should be accompanied by effective adult learning. And I also was happy to see that your recommendations are very much in line with the recommendations which are social partners and civil society organizations, because this is the composition of the European Economic and Social Committee. We have 3 groups. For those who don't know, we have employers group, we have trade unions group, and we have civil society representatives in the European Economic and Social Committee. And this is the advisory body for the European Commission, for the European Parliament, for the European Council, and of course for the presidency country. In this case, my opinion is of course, gives recommendations to the European Commission, to the member states, and we request to enhance adult learning policies by taking a holistic view, not only for work, but for life. Adult learning is needed, and accessibility, quality, inclusiveness should be improved. At the same time, of course, we have to respect national competencies in education and training and the principle of subsidiarity. So in our opinion, we stress a lot that holistic, let's say, perspective when we speak about adult learning. We see that it's essential for helping adults improve and acquire citizenship skills and take an active role in society. Indeed, in your recommendations, you also mentioned the democracy goes together with education. Otherwise, the spread of radicalism, the spread of fake news is very harmful if it's not, I mean, on everyone. It's essential to support adult learning in this respect. And also in the opinion, we underline while we underline the importance of adult learning, of course, we express the regret that the EU institutions and several member states do not consider it a political priority, while we all say that this is essential, that this is not only for employment, this is for social inclusion, this is for enabling adults to actively participate in labor market and be democratic citizens. So therefore, we also we recommend the member states to strengthen the policy, the governance, the funding to adult learning according to the principles of UNESCO 4 pillars of education, as learning to know, to do, to be able to live together. And in order to implement SDG 4, there needs to be effective support for civil society to build a partnership on adult learning provision in informal and non-formal settings, and to ensure effective outreach to people. This is exactly, I mean, your network is standing for, you're close to people, you connecting people, and not only social partners, but civil society organizations are very important. And maybe I will not occupy all the time, but I will say that the COVID-19 induced shutdowns of economic activities decreased workers' participation. We don't know, unfortunately, the statistics. Therefore, we request also the Commission and the member states to have clear, statistically clear data on the participation of adults in lifelong learning. But for the workers, we know that participation in non-formal learning decreased by an average of 18%, and informal learning by 25%. So we have now to set ambitious goals and support these ambitious goals for sustainable financing. You mentioned that many activities in adult learning are fragmented. They are indeed because the sustainable financing for adult learning should be complemented by effective use of EU funds, recovery, resilience facility, for instance, on the first place. And we should see also national budget, how national financing is sustained by this EU funds. So there are many things. There are altogether 18 recommendations, and I can put the link. The opinion will be adopted in the plenary at beginning of July. So it was adopted just in SOC section on Monday, this Monday. So there was unanimous support for the opinion, and I hope it will be the same for plenary. And I will just send you the link, and you can see all the recommendations. But as I have said already, they are very, very much in line with what are your recommendation. And of course, we cooperated. We had a meeting with Gina. Thank you, Gina, for your input. And we had also meetings with other stakeholders. Therefore, for example, we had Disability Forum representative, and we included also focus on people with disabilities, people with different disadvantaged and social economically kind of disadvantaged and physically and etc. So we have many points there, and it's difficult to wrap all the points.
No, thanks a lot. That was very clear, and congratulations for the unanimity, and keep our fingers crossed for the next step. Carlos, Cataly, do you want to then continue? Yeah.
Yes, cool. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and congratulations for this very interesting and very relevant project, which you have presented the results. Now, adult learning, well, it is indeed in the agenda at European level. You know that one of 3 targets set in the action plan to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights is about participation in adult learning, because this is indeed one of our great policy challenges, how to increase participation in adult learning. Adult learning has a good image, also and in particular, the general population. As a recent survey organized by CEDEFOP, was published in 2020, a survey on the perception of adult learning. Perception really among the general population, and more than 90% of people do consider that adult learning and continuing training are useful for personal development, and that they are also useful for job-related purposes, for career progression, and even for better income. Still, the reality is that less than 40% of adults in Europe participate in learning in every year. Of course, there are many reasons why there is this mismatch about the good image of the learning and the low rate of participation in adult learning. Many adults would like to participate, but cannot for one or the other reason. it can be a matter of time. It is difficult for people to be able to do everything that they would like to do, even if they are aware that this would be very beneficial for both of them, their family, their company, their society in general. It's a matter of time. It's also a matter of money. There are the costs related to learning and to adult learning in particular. When it comes to workers, often costs are covered by companies, but it's not necessarily the case. And for small and medium enterprise, it is very difficult to be able to cover the cost of training staff. And the majority of European workers do work in small and medium companies. And more of them do not work for anybody. That is, they are self-employed, or they have a typical working arrangements, which means there is no employer to be able to pay for them. Now, there are a number of recent action which are still in preparation that try to address these challenges. As you know, we had announced in the Skills Agenda initiative on individual learning accounts, which is still in its, how could I say, consultation and impact assessment phase. So there are still many open issues to be addressed before we are able to present the proposal, but our aim is still to be able to present the Commission proposal within the end of this year, or maybe very early next year. The idea of individual learning account is to provide adults with financial entitlements to be able to cover costs of learning. And then these entitlements are retained no matter whether these people are employed or unemployed, or they move companies. This is not a very widespread approach so far in Europe. There only is one national scheme for individual learning accounts. It's in France. There are a number of regional or local experiences which are quite interesting, but none of them is on a large scale. And I should say that the preliminary consultation has given mixed results. Not everybody sees this proposal with a favorable view. Many employer representatives, for instance, are quite worried by the idea that give entitlements directly to workers or to adults in general, even if they are not even workers, because they are afraid of losing control about the staff development of their workers. In some countries, there are perplexities linked to the fact of to what extent it is effective to give financial support to people to train, to look for training opportunities, or in general for learning opportunities. They might not be able to choose opportunities which are really relevant for the labor market. One obvious answer, of course, is that, as Tatiana said, adult learning is not only for the labor market, it is for personal development in general, and this matters, and we should provide financial resources for this. Then you never really know what is not relevant for labor market. People can develop skills without having any job in mind. Many people, for instance, learn languages not because of any occupational perspective, but because they are interested in it, and then these linguistic skills become useful in their job. And this is true for a good number of other skills related, for instance, to communication or to many other transversal characteristics. So we do expect that the debate on our proposal will be very intensive. Not likely that the two presidency of the European Union will be enough to come to an adoption by the Council of whatever the Commission will propose. But still, this has happened for other proposals before, and at the end, results have been good. The preparation of the European qualification framework has taken 4 years. Then it has taken its role, and now it's difficult to think of European education training without the European qualification framework. So we are confident that things will move. But this is not the only action that we are proposing. We are working together with in the Commission, together with a number of stakeholders, to prepare a proposal on micro-credentials. This is because it's good to develop skills, but it is also good to have these skills recognized in some way. Indeed, one of the reasons why people often do not participate in lifelong learning is that this skill will not be recognized in any way. Micro-credential will offer the opportunities to recognize skills developed through a number of possible pathways, in particular short courses. It's difficult for adults to be able to participate in sustained programs of training. More likely that they attend short courses or short non-formal courses. It's even more frequent. So the idea of micro-credential is to be able to recognize the skills which have been developed through these particular learning pathways. We hope to be able to present this proposal also within the end of this year. This proposal might be a bit less controversial, also because there is less money involved, and we know that money matters when it comes to take legislative decisions. But still, we expect the debate to be quite intensive on this too. Now, I could go on, but
thank you so much
maybe I can
for
stop
explaining those initiatives.
You know, when Carlo was speaking, I was, the idea came to my mind. We have youth guarantee. We have now developed child guarantee. Why is adult guarantee? So this is the group of people now deprived from guarantee to have the guarantee that they can, let's say, have their skills validated for free. That all this acquisition of skills or whatsoever for work, but also for life. Everything should be for free. So it's not even a question. So public employment services should be for free for adults. So let's advocate for this guarantee for adults. That would be the next step of the European Union to provide this adult guarantee, because of course there are many other issues, health issue, living, this and this, that, but learning is one of these guarantees. This is the right, the human right. So, Carlo, I give you a good idea.
Yeah, but guarantee. If I can add, okay, thank you for this idea. But you know that we presented the proposal that was then adopted as upskilling pathways. We had called it skills guarantee. So the idea is to provide a guarantee for adult skills development. But that was not accepted by the Council. They transformed it into upskilling pathways, which sounds very well in English, not necessarily in all languages, but you have to do.
So
we might go back to.
Neve, do you want to comment on this maybe?
Yeah, I won't get into the details there. I guess maybe just reflecting on the recommendations from the FutureLab project, and particularly the one that it says includes change-orientated adult education and transformative learning as a priority as part of the European agenda for adult learning, and just how important that is. And I think the project offers yet another evidence base for this, for supporting this kind of adult learning. I suppose in civil society, we talk extensively about the need for holistic education, education that enables change from bottom up. We research it, and Dr. Finnegan spoke about that earlier. We debate it, we try to influence the discourse. We've been doing it for decades. And I suppose we always kind of get into a binary position around the skills for the economy and the broader purpose of learning. And I suppose, why do we keep doing this? It's because it matters. Because if you believe in educational equality, you know that change-orientated education, transformative learning really works. It engages the most marginalized in society. It matters because, you know, formal vocationally orientated education is only one part of the pie in terms of education provision. And if you've only got one slice, you can't feed everybody. You need the whole diversity of adult education provision. So we talk extensively about this topic. We have a huge amount of evidence, and because ultimately the impact that it has on the learner. When we engage with learners in community education, and they talk about having a voice, finding a voice, their voice being repressed for years. You know, this is what people would call soft skills. I remember one learner said to me, soft skills are the hardest to get. So I think there really needs to be a recognition of the value of that. And we talk about transversal skills, but also it's the foundation for inclusive, authentic engagement in adult learning. And one question I always have, with all of this evidence, we debated extensively, but, you know, show me an example of a system that has been built solely on a skills model of education. Is it inclusive? I have never seen one. We know this model of education is inclusive. So I think we have so much evidence and we debate it so often, and the time is for change. It's like FutureLab says, it's change orientated. We have to look at having policy that is truly inclusive and values you know, the broader purpose of learning. We've said this so much. And I suppose we talked about funding, and it was one of the things that came up at the Menti meeting is like, what stops this kind of education? And funding was the number one thing. And it was a really interesting debate from Thomas about, you know, funding, where it comes from and fitting in with priority. But if we're looking at policy, that's the focus of policy is very much so on who gets funded and who doesn't get funded. And I think if it was included as part of the European Agenda for Adult Learning, as national coordinator, there's an opportunity to, you know, test things out at national level. The value of the European Agenda for Adult Learning is that there's funding put by, so you can look at how you can develop different approaches or experiment with policy. And I think there's huge potential on that. And if it's not there as a priority, it won't get funded. And if we're talking about funding as well, we have new research that's coming out next week where 76 community education organizations are funded by 9 government departments through 51 funding streams. I mean, this is a mind-boggling complexity of funding that takes away valuable time from engaging with learners and those who are most marginalized and engaging in outreach. So like the time is now for action. We have enough evidence, in my opinion, to justify the funding, the prioritization of change-orientated and transformative learning. We know that it works. I suppose ultimately what we have learned over the last year is that connection matters. And one adult learner said to us, adult learning has been a lifeline during the pandemic. And we have a huge body of work to re-engage people, to engage in outreach, and to bring people back in to education. And we know that change-orientated and the pedagogic approach, having space, safe space that we talked about, is so important. So in terms of the prioritization and the recommendations you have there, it's not a question of what's important, it's a matter of when are we going to do this? Because the time is now. So I'll pass back to yourself, Francesca. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Niamh. Yes, I was looking at the chat. There is, and it's linked to what you were also saying, the connection between adult education and local development, and the learning that happens in communities, in territories. I didn't talk about this because it was a national recommendation, but indeed the way how providers are funded and accredited really makes a difference. And I think you showed it very well also in your in the speech. Yes, so there was also a question about, Dr. Finnegan was commenting on the financial resources that probably for the learners are important as time, and he was mentioning an example in the 70s in Italy and Scandinavia. So you can see that in the chat. I was wondering whether anyone from the audience wants to join the debates, maybe say something. We haven't been very open, and we had Mentimeter activities, but time is always running. It's our curse. Is there anyone that wants to join and maybe, I don't know, raising their hands? Not really. Okay, so Tatiana, I think I cut you before. Do you want to Do you still have anything to say, or you wanted to talk before Niamh, I think?
Yes, I just was thinking about you know, that maybe when I have read your recommendations, I was thinking that it should be also I mean, digital is indeed very important, but environmental policies also should be connected to education policies. That we say also in our EAC opinion, and we should also set up national green skills and competency strategies to make every adult aware of climate change, environmental responsibility, sustainable development as part of life learning. And we even suggest to appoint national coordinators for that. And indeed, we have to be more ambitious. In the opinion, we call the European Commission and the member states to strengthen adult learning policy, to make quality and inclusive adult learning for life skills a right for all adults, and to meet and increase the target of 60% of adult learning participation per year. As I said, we have big losses now at the moment. Therefore, we need to be more ambitious. We don't have the status quo we had before the pandemic, where now are kind of going down. Therefore, we have to be to set higher targets for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, this new consultation now on the environmental education about environmental responsibility, it explicitly mentions that adult learning should be also included here. So it's also a chance for us to participate actively in this consultation and bring adult learning also higher in the agenda.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So nobody from the audience wants to say anything? Sorry, Carlo, just checking again. Okay, please go ahead.
No, if I can just take this opportunity to invite everybody to participate in the open consultation on individual learning account, which is still open, and it's really open to everybody, also to individual citizens.
Yeah, we discussed that because yesterday we had a General Assembly of the EAEA, and we divided ourselves into groups, and also we discussed that, and we will certainly react. But thanks for the reminder. If there are external participants, of course, they can use this opportunity. Okay, so maybe I just ask you to give me, I think it was in line with what Niamh asked herself at the beginning, some scenarios. How do you imagine the future of adult education in Europe in the next years? I don't know. Well, Dr. Finnegan told us that we are in trouble, but there is hope. What do you think about this?
Well, yes, I would say that yes, there should be hope. There certainly is a good level of attention to adult learning at policy level. And there is more and more awareness among the general population. I think the results of the SEDEF observed are quite interesting when it comes to the awareness that of people as concerns the possible benefit of adult learning and why adult learning can be so important for them. So it's really a matter to be able to put this in practice, to support people to take advantage of the opportunities which are provided to them, and which of course should increase and the quality of opportunity should also increase. There is also a need to make sure that the opportunities which are provided for the skills development are well quality assured. And then, as I said, talking of micro-credential, also recognize, because it is also important for people to get recognition for the effort which they do for their own personal development, but also finally also to improve the skills available for the community at large. So on the whole, I am reasonably optimistic. I often talk with the perplexed stakeholders about the 60% target of adult participants in learning. I'll tell them that my personal bet is that we will reach 70%, because I really think that it should become the norm for everybody to participate in at least some non-formal opportunities every year. This has become really a necessity. Things how the pandemic, of course, has made this even clearer. Unfortunately, the impact of the pandemic will be very strong on a number of workers in some sectors in particular, and many people will actually have to change their jobs, and they can only do so if they are able to develop new skills, or to refresh their skills, or to adapt their skills to different to different tasks, or at least to different working environments. More and more office workers will have to work telework more often than we used to do until recently, and this also requires a different set of skills. So I really think, I mean, in perspective, adult learning, just like initial learning, needs to become universal. Or that may not become true by 2030. Let's be more modest and stick to the 60% target, and I'm quite confident that we will achieve this target.
Okay, thank you so much, Carlo, for this. Who wants to go next? Tatiana, yes.
I would say that I am actually now more optimistic than I was a few years ago, or even before pandemic, because what pandemic did for adults actually forced them to be digital. And many were not expected that they have to take jobs online, and they have to actually also take some trainings. And there are so many online platforms, so many trainings developed online, and they are growing like mushrooms. And we see kind of really boom of this digital opportunities for adults, and which of course increases the accessibility, because indeed we have to speak about remote regions, we have to speak about rural areas where there are not so much offer for adults on different training opportunities. So I see a huge potential, and we have to grasp this opportunity and simply see whether quality is there, what is the content, to put kind of, because we don't know what's happening there. It's now, as I said, it's like mushrooms in the forest. Some are eatable, some are not eatable at all. But we are here as experts. We have to see and select and define what is actually suitable and eatable, and what is that kind of poisonous, as the kind of fake platforms, fake news, bringing some kind of adult, not adult learning, like you see now, for example, about vaccination. You can find a lot on YouTube or something like a pseudo doctor or medical professional is talking about harmful vaccination, etc., etc., etc. And especially you see, because I'm following what's happening in Russia, especially I see what's happening in Russia. Therefore, they have now really, really a huge wave of pandemic due to this reason, because there are a lot of fake news and misinformation. Therefore, I think that I'm optimistic about the future, and let's be positive and see how we can all together join our forces and use the Slovenian presidency to come with some very, very relevant projecting how adult learning will be developed in the future.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. Niamh?
Yeah, I mean, I know I sounded a bit angry there earlier, because I suppose it's that very righteous anger. I mean, anger at injustice, but totally hopeful, so totally in agreement with Tatiana, and also hopeful because EAEA is this really vibrant family of adult education advocates across Europe with amazing expertise that we can draw on. And I think we're all together in terms of our mobilization around the need for this and the need for action. And I think within the Future Lab project, talk about partnership, diversity, heterogeneity of provision, meeting people where they're at to engage. And this is going to be absolutely central to going forward. I think, again, you've given a really clear outline of what's needed, of having holistic learner-centered education that really cares for learners at the heart. In terms of, I suppose, examples, I think going forward, we need to provide more information of what's needed. So with regard to, for example, autonomy around funding. I mentioned earlier around the complexity of funding community education, and we did a big piece of work last year that described what a really good fund would look like, how organizations would be able to respond to local need, that there wouldn't be so many targets and parameters set. And that was taken up, and Ireland was very fortunate to get a significant amount of funding for community education. So I think through the collective expertise of coming up with solutions like you've done through the Future Lab project is going to be really helpful going forward. I think with regards to, there's a lot of talk around accreditation, and I think it is absolutely vitally important, particularly people at the early stages of the NFQ, the National Framework of Qualifications, have access to accreditation as needed, and that learning accounts are equitable and people are supported in their choice, and that we don't have the Matthew effect as well. So there's always a question that we ask around that. But I suppose when you have questions about where does public funding, where should it be? It should be supporting people who didn't get the best education experience in school. And that means you have to fund the system, I suppose, and not just in terms of the individual. But one thing that came up in our, I'm just going to close now, Francesca, I know you need to leave.
No problem.
But one thing that came up in community education is the reliance on learner fees. So you're looking for, because they can't function with the underfunding that they get. And I mean, obviously that's inequitable if people have left school early and are looking to engage in basic skills and then have to pay. I mean, we have ethical questions around that and the state's role in addressing it. But I suppose to end on a positive note, you know, what we've seen is the support around community further and higher education in Ireland, calling for real change. I think there's a real opportunity now. And I think through the, you know, the collective expertise of EAEA, the evidence that you have through the Future Lab project of holding on to the heterogeneity, of working together to see where people are at and providing really authentic, engaged learning experience for people is absolutely essential for the pandemic going forward. So feeling hopeful, but yeah, with a critical eye.
A lot to do as well.
Thanks.
Okay, so thank you so much to all of you. It was great to have you with us. I'm sorry that the time is really running, but I think we had the opportunity to listen from all of you and the initiatives that you are all supporting at the moment. So we would like to then move on to the next, like the closing speech from and maybe some questions for you. We'll see what Gina will say. So I will give the floor to the EAEA Secretary General.
Thank you, Francesca. Okay, I'm unmuted. Perfect. Thank you so much. I found this morning extremely inspiring, and I hope the same is true for you. I don't have any questions, and in a way, I don't really have conclusions. I have conclusions when looking into the future. And I think, and I would like to, I'm going to borrow from everyone, so you will hear some of your arguments now. Back to you. I think what today has shown, what we are trying to do, and it's the collective that Niamh has talked about. It's not one person or one project consortium. It's the collective voice, or the voices coming together of the EAEA, the competencies of adult education and so on. So what we're trying to do is continue working on the ground with learners, as learners, for learners and so on. And I think we have done a lot of work here in methodology. There are fantastic examples. So that is definitely something we're going to continue, and we're going to continue with ambition. And I think that is one of the words I want to continue mentioning. Ambition is really what we need in what we're doing. The same is true for policy, and actually Tatiana very well summed it up. We need really well structured and well working systems in all the countries that, you know, take the learner into account. So we need to continue on the policy level. Those of you who work on the national level, we will continue doing it at the EAEA, the European level, and of course working together. The third step is the societal one, and here Fergal, I think, gave us a lot of food for thought on how to continue. But of course we want to make progress there, and in a way, if you then think about the social movements, the citizens who could and should participate, where we demand accountability and so on, you can only do that again with people and with learners and us on the ground. So we're doing a circle from, you know, the learners to the policy to the societal and so on. So with the ambition that I have heard this morning, and not only this morning, we as adult educators should really, you know, we need to stand up and say, we are doing valuable work and we can go forward. So that's my message. I know it's not super innovative, but we need to remind ourselves from time to time about what we can do and to go forward. There's a question as in final words, encourage adults. I'll come back to that. Let me quickly first say a big thank you to you for participating, and I've seen the very vibrant discussions. Hopefully you will be able to take the ideas and the issues and the recommendations and the guidelines on whichever level you're working back to your working spot, your life and so on. As I said, I will annoy everyone with the concept of restless democracy. So my Francesca, get ready. So please take it and go out and with ambition, work on change in the various areas. A big thank you to you, a big thank you to the EAEA team. I think I can't praise them enough for all the work that has gone into it. I mean, to really make the two events, yesterday and today, such smoothly organized things that you experienced. You know, there was enormous work behind it and enormous enthusiasm. So a big thank you to all of you. Thank you to the project consortium, our speakers, everyone who's been involved. It's been a fantastic, you know, a fantastic 2 days. I have a lot of inspiration. I can show you that. That's the ideas for a few future projects. So get ready. What would we tell learners? In a way, well, let me go back to our manifesto. It's the power and joy of learning. The power of learning, the power of learning that can transform lives, can transform families, societies, and so on. Learning, and we have so many examples. I have Neve on one of the pictures in front of me. The examples you always collect when you have your star awards of learners who have transformed their lives, but also their neighborhoods. I mean, it's fantastic. Learning has the power to change, and it is joyful. Once you overcome the fears that are connected to learning, it will provide a lot of joy in your life. It will bring you friends. It will bring you satisfaction. So that is exactly why we are working and why we're doing what we're doing. And let's do it on the ground, in policy, in society. Thank you, and hope to see you soon, and hope to see you with a lot of inspiration and ideas at the next meeting. Bye.